So considering there's going to be an election for governor in 8 months, I've heard almost nothing about the race. There was one pretty high profile exit right after the Capitol riot. But isn't it unusual at this point for there to be a relative dead air this close to the election? And or are we just seeing that COVID and the national politics are just shoving everything out of the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a little bit of both. I mean, I think it's really difficult to kind of gain any air during COVID because that is what everyone is thinking about and paying attention to. And of course, that gives, on some level, Governor Murphy an advantage because every day he has these press conferences talking about where the state is with regard to COVID recovery, the number of cases, how schools are handling it, and so on and so forth, which is, of course, what he should be doing. And that's what governors do as well as incumbent candidates, right? So there's that. There's also the idea that, you know, you mentioned candidate ducking out. Now we do have a presumptive Republican nominee, Jack Ciattarelli, who has bought some campaign advertising, but I think it is a bit early. The advertising that I've seen is really interesting, that he's taken a tact that is a kind of personal likability, like he's one of us, right? There's nothing even remotely ideological or partisan about it. He recognizes that he's going to have to appeal to some Democratic voters in a state like New Jersey. So it is, in my view, while not mentioning Governor Murphy, kind of a juxtaposition to Governor Murphy, who's kind of not a New Jerseyan, right? Or didn't grow. He is obviously a New Jerseyan now, but by background is not. And, you know, Ciattarelli is kind of making this case along a personal argument, which I think is how you have to run as a Republican in 2021, right?
Right. And especially against, I mean, in my opinion at this point, which really doesn't, but that Murphy seems to be in a fairly strong position, right? I think New Jersey's done very well. And, you know, with coming out with this budget that's got a plus to it, looks like he's really orchestrated this from the beginning. And not that he could have predicted the pandemic, but he seems to be in a strong spot, isn't he?
Yes. And I think a lot of people, you know, when you look at New Jersey's numbers, we're clearly on, at least right now, the downside of the curve. Vaccinations are high. I get texts a couple times a day saying, there's appointments available. I registered every place around the state, so I'm getting all these text messages from North Jersey on down to Cape May. And so I think that a lot of people rightly give credit to Governor Murphy for his handling of the pandemic. Remember, before the Biden administration, it really was these governors that were in the trenches trying to figure out policy that really should have been a federal policy. And they were creating a playbook as they were going along. And I think that many New Jerseyans recognize that. We also see now, because COVID seems to be coming under control and opening of the economy and all of this, the insertion of all this federal money means that there's more money to spend. Small businesses are feeling a little bit more wiggle room, all of which, of course, bodes well for an incumbent.
Yep.
The other thing, of course, that we should mention is that Governor Murphy himself is not a person without resources, right? So if at any point in time he wants to opt out of public spending, the public matching, he can, insert millions, tens of millions of dollars into his own reelection campaign, which I think if he felt like there was a significant threat, I'm certain he would be willing to do.
Sure. I mean, he's got the incumbency behind him and a good amount of cash of his own, but it hasn't been all peachy and rosy for him, right? I mean, he promised a deal in 100 days. It took him 3 years for the democratically controlled government to close the deal on legalizing recreational use of cannabis. I did a blog posting of my own where I said, in New Jersey, we haven't met anything we weren't willing to screw up. What took so long? And does the delay hurt Murphy in November, or does it hurt those who held this up?
I think that, is there a proportion of the electorate who's going to sit there and say, he promised legalized cannabis and we didn't get it 4 years after he said we would, so therefore I'm not going to vote for him, when the alternative is someone who probably wouldn't have legalized it to begin with? Maybe there is that handful of voters. I don't think that it's going to hurt him significantly. It does kind of hurt the state in terms of competitive advantage economically when you see New York coming on board, right, as we did. But having said that, this was not his doing, right? There were significant legislative obstacles. And remember, again, this is probably a piece of legislation that should be handled federally, right? There are complications that with this still on this cannabis on the schedule of controlled dangerous substances, that it has a whole lot of public policy consequences, from everything in terms of banking to vulnerabilities of populations who are growing and so on. And then you also see the kind of public policy at the latter part in those cleanup bills about youth using, young people using cannabis. You see real serious concerns articulated by the Legislative Black Caucus around issues of social justice. And so I think it's really important that you get it right. That is not to say that there wasn't some politics going on, right? Sometimes the governor and the state legislature have had a little bit of an acrimonious relationship. But right now everybody's, it's a kumbaya moment. And so they got it through. And, at least having gotten it through before the election will serve the governor well.